Hi there, I'm Matt with the Conservation Council of New Brunswick. I'm our Marine Program Director and Fundy Baykeeper, and this is...
Zoe. I work with the communications team here at the Conservation Council of New Brunswick, and I do most of the social media work here.
And Zoe pitched to the rest of us the idea of putting a podcast out to let our members and the general public know about some of what we're up to here at the Conservation Council. And I asked Zoe to join me in my section of the podcast because I'm one of the longest serving staff so far at CCMB. I've been here 15 years.
And today we're going to be diving into the history of the Conservation Council of New Brunswick and also some of the incredible work Matt is doing here.
Thank you. Yes. Zoe found the person with the grayest hair to talk about the history. What a surprise. Excellent. I've been with CCMB since 2009. I was the Fundy Baykeeper summer student in 2009. And then when I graduated university, I was offered a full-time position, which was amazing. So I've been with the organization full-time for going on 14 years. And it wasn't a given for me. It wasn't my plan to necessarily even stay in New Brunswick after university or work for the Conservation Council. But there's a few things that frankly made it easy and exciting to stick around. And I think one of the first things that really was a credit to the organization and kept the work fresh and exciting was that I came into an organization that had already been doing decades of work on relationships. So the organization had relationships with Indigenous nations in the region I worked and with fishers and coastal communities and others. So I was able to build on that, and it's really, I think the key lesson, one of the key learnings from doing this work for a while, for over a decade, is that sort of the centrality of relationships, right? It really takes complicated relationships to get some of these things done. And I think the groundwork had already been laid for that, right? My predecessors had done work on community-supported fisheries, on the impacts of salmon aquaculture, on the impacts of development in coastal regions. And so the groundwork was there, and I think the fact of being in a smaller place like New Brunswick, and especially based in a more rural area like Charlotte County, our marine program has been based in St. Andrews for quite some time, it's meant that those relationships can quite naturally evolve. I think one of the risks with environmental groups or with people really in any sector is that you just end up talking to yourselves, to people who agree with you. And I think something CCMB has managed and something I've tried to do in my time is have those complex relationships, like with the fishing industry, where we really agree on some files, be it ghost gear or marine debris and impacts from salmon aquaculture, and work really hard together, and then have disagreements on other files like marine protected areas, but still find ways to work together and to be able to sometimes in the same week or even the same day be working with each other and sometimes maybe opposing perspectives, but doing such in a way that we really take the time to understand each other and work together. And I think that's one of the real strengths of CCMB from my perspective. How's it seem to you? What have you noticed coming in as a newer employee?
Yeah, on a similar note, internally we also have those relationships because as we have all of our different programs, forestry, marine, learning outside, all of those areas that don't seem to be super connected, all of our staff work very closely together to make sure all of the work we're doing reflects the work of others and we're all doing cohesive work.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, that's great. And another thing I really love about CCMB and that the history precedes the work I've done by a long time. I think there is strength. We're an organization formed in 1969, formed in really the first years of the modern environmental movement in many ways, right on the heels of Silent Spring, which was a sort of wake-up call to non-Indigenous North Americans especially, but even within Europe, I think it had some impact as well. And it really, it was This was a book focused on the loss of songbirds from the use of pesticides in forestry, and that book even had a chapter on New Brunswick, so it's not a surprise that the environmental movement grew out of that. And CCMB has kind of been there all along. And one thing I really appreciate, and that a lot of my colleagues and predecessors deserve a lot of credit from, is sort of worked on files that were really important before they were popular, that became popular. So for instance, CCMB had the first community-supported agriculture farm in New Brunswick called the CSA. And we sort of had that as a demonstration, trial project, but also a meaningful contribution of local food. And now I'm a member of a CSA in St. Andrews. My best friends are farmers in St. Andrews. It's become a fairly normal thing. Similarly, we've done it on some more contentious files as well. Like one of my colleagues, Stephanie Merrill, who's with the Nature Trust of New Brunswick now, really did core work on understanding what the risks of hydraulic fracking for natural gas would be, and did really important grassroots work, going community hall to community hall, writing reports, meeting with people, really making sure people understood the risks to their community. And then we saw a really impactful, significant social movement grow. And I think it's appropriate for a group like Conservation Council of New Brunswick to help build some of those movements. We have the time. We're lucky to be staff who are paid to do the things we care about, so we can do some of that early work to help build social movements and raise concern around things. So I think we have a legacy of doing that, and I think it's a really important role to play, and we need those advocacy organizations that can notice the emerging trends and help the public movements build either opposition to something or build support for something like transition to renewables or something like that.
For sure.
Yeah. One of the files I've been working on since I started is the restoration of Gaspereau populations in Bescotamocati, Zignamegua, which is not a perfect pronunciation of the Bescotamocati word, but I've been told it's relatively close. And actually, when I was a summer student, the first job I was given by my supervisor was to write a primer. Probably now we would have called it a blog, but at the time we were still printing things out and handing them out at community events. And so I wrote a primer on the plight of Gaspereau in the Scudic River. I was calling it the St. Croix River at the time, but now I know its original name, the Scudic. And so that was a case where an indigenous fish had been essentially kicked out of the river, first by dam building and forestry practices over the past 200 years, but more recently by policy by the state of Maine. The Scudic is the border river between New Brunswick and Maine, but it's the heart of Bescotamocati territory. It's obviously not a border for the Bescotamocati, it's the center of their territory, but for Canada and US it's a border. And so I wrote a primer, was part of some public education work, and then once I came on full time, I got to be part of sort of a much larger effort to open the river to the fish. And that's a case where, 10 years ago, the best case scenario to me was that we might, get 1 million or 2 million fish back in the Scudic River, that we'd be able to open existing fishways and maybe fix them, but that I didn't, I knew that the river deserved more than that, but I wasn't terribly hopeful. But over decades of work, led by the Passamaquoddy Scudic River Keepers, a group of Passamaquoddy citizens, and with Passamaquoddy governments as well, we've been able to work on a 10-year campaign that took us from fighting to have some fish in the river versus no fish in the river to asking how many tens of millions of fish we can have in the river. And it's really exciting. It's been this project. It's something we've been working on. It's been a steady file of ours for over a decade. And it's really a testament to how collaboration and cooperation can make things that seemed impossible. 10 years ago, removing a dam, which happened last year on the Scudic River, seemed impossible. 10 million fish seemed impossible, right? 1 million fish seemed like, too much to ask, but we just sort of kept plugging away, and that impossible became hard. It never gets easy, but hard we can do. And it's a real testament to relationships that were forged in sort of a campaign against the Maine state government. But those relationships were strong, and what started as a protest campaign has now become this real positive campaign of, how are the many ways we can help the river. And one of the best examples in my mind of what's possible when you just sort of stick with it, like an organization like CCMB can do when it's over 15 years old. It can stick with files even if they're unpopular but important over time, is that we can see those impossible things happen. And I think one of the best testaments to how much is possible is I said that, as little as 11 years ago, I was in the Maine state legislature along with a bunch of colleagues from NGOs from Canada, Maine, and representatives from the Besquet-Makati and other Indigenous nations, really demanding that the state of Maine open the river. And so they were our chief opponent. And now the same departments we were fighting against are spending millions of dollars to get more fish upriver.
Right.
And so we stood firm, but then always kept that door open to collaboration. And frankly, things we couldn't have imagined at the time have happened. And so that's, I think, the testament to the long-term work and to that power of collaboration.